The weakest recruit in a SEAL class isn't always the one who makes the biggest mistake, Sergeant Mason Reed shouted across the training pool. Sometimes it's the one standing next to him. The words echoed through the cold morning air as dozens of exhausted recruits stood shoulder to shoulder beside the water. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. At 5:10 a.m., the training compound was already awake. Floodlights reflected across the dark surface of the pool, while a thin layer of mist drifted above the water. The temperature hovered just above 50 degrees, cold enough to make every breath visible. The recruits had been awake for nearly 3 days. Their uniforms were damp. Their boots felt heavier with every passing hour. Some struggled to keep their eyes open. Others stared straight ahead, afraid that even the smallest mistake might end their dream of becoming part of an elite military unit. Standing near the center of the formation was Private Noah Bennett, 22 years old, broad shoulders, short brown hair, a former college swimmer from Ohio. On paper, he looked exactly like the kind of candidate instructors wanted. Yet at that moment, Noah looked anything but confident. Water dripped from his sleeves. His jaw clenched tightly as he fought through exhaustion. Beside the pool, Sergeant Mason Reed paced slowly in front of the formation. His reputation was legendary throughout the training command. He was loud, demanding, relentless. Many recruits feared him. Some admired him. Nobody ignored him. "You think the enemy cares if you're tired?" Reed barked. "You think real operations stop because you didn't get enough sleep?" No one answered. Reed stopped suddenly and pointed toward a recruit standing several feet away from Noah. "Get out." The young man blinked in confusion. "Sir, you heard me. Pack your gear. You're done." Silence swept through the formation. The recruit lowered his head. Nobody argued. Nobody stepped forward. In this place, questioning an instructor could end a career before it even started. As the dismissed recruit walked away, Noah felt something twist in his stomach. He had seen what happened during the exercise. He knew why the recruit had struggled. More importantly, he knew something else. Something that didn't make sense. Across the pool deck, another figure watched everything unfold without saying a word. Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker stood near the edge of the floodlights, her arms folded calmly across her chest. Unlike Reed, she never shouted. She never paced. She never demanded attention. At 39 years old, Grace carried herself with quiet confidence. Her uniform was perfectly pressed despite the long night. Her expression revealed almost nothing. Many recruits underestimated her. Some instructors did too. They assumed her silence meant hesitation. They assumed her calm demeanor meant softness. They were wrong. Grace's eyes moved carefully across the formation, watching, measuring, recording every reaction, every hesitation, every glance exchanged between recruits. Nothing escaped her attention. Reed continued speaking. "Today's rescue evaluation proved one thing. Some of you don't belong here." Several instructors nodded in agreement. Others exchanged knowing looks. Noah stared at the water. The dismissed recruit had not failed because he lacked effort. He had not failed because he was weak. Something had gone wrong before the exercise even began. Noah knew it. And deep down, he had a feeling Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker knew it too. The difference was that Grace remained silent. For now, the dismissed recruit disappeared beyond the equipment building, leaving an uneasy silence hanging over the training compound. The remaining candidates stood motionless beside the pool while the first rays of sunrise pushed through the gray clouds above the base. Noah Bennett tried to focus on the next instruction, but his mind kept returning to the exercise. Something about it felt wrong. Not difficult. Not unfair. Wrong. Sergeant Mason Reed blew a sharp whistle and pointed toward the far side of the training area. "Move. Classroom briefing in 2 minutes." The formation broke instantly. Boots struck wet concrete as dozens of exhausted recruits hurried across the compound. Nobody wanted to be the last person through the door. Inside the briefing room, rows of metal chairs faced a large whiteboard covered with diagrams from previous exercises. The recruits took their seats while instructors lined the walls. Noah settled into a chair near the middle of the room. His body was tired, but his attention remained fixed on the board. A few moments later, Reed entered carrying a clipboard. "This morning exposed weaknesses," he announced. "Weaknesses get people removed from the program." Several recruits lowered their eyes. Nobody wanted attention directed at them. Reed continued speaking about teamwork, discipline, and accountability. Most of it sounded familiar. Standard training doctrine. Standard pressure. Then Noah noticed something. In the corner of the whiteboard remained a faded diagram from the previous evening. It showed the rescue sequence used during underwater emergency drills. Noah stared at it. His pulse quickened. The sequence on the board did not match the instructions Reed had given beside the pool. Not even close. Noah leaned forward. Maybe exhaustion was affecting his memory. 3 days without proper sleep could make anyone question details. He looked again. The discrepancy remained. Across the room, Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker sat quietly near the back wall. Unlike the other instructors, she took no notes. She simply watched. Her expression never changed. Reed moved to the next topic. Trust the chain of command. That principle is non-negotiable. Noah glanced toward the board once more. The more he studied it, the more convinced he became that the dismissed recruit had followed the posted procedure correctly. A knot formed in his stomach. If that was true, then the recruit had been blamed for a mistake that was never his. Noah shifted in his seat. Beside him, another recruit whispered, "You look like you saw a ghost." Noah forced a small smile. Just tired. But he was not thinking about sleep anymore. He was thinking about responsibility. The briefing ended 30 minutes later. Chairs scraped against the floor as recruits stood to leave. Reed ordered everyone back outside for the next evaluation. As the room emptied, Noah remained seated for a second longer. His eyes met Grace Whitaker's across the room. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Yet something about her steady gaze made Noah uneasy. It was not judgment. It was not approval. It felt more like a question waiting for an answer. Then Grace looked toward the whiteboard, paused for a moment, and walked out of the room. Noah followed her glance. His eyes settled once again on the rescue diagram. For the first time, he began to wonder whether the real test had nothing to do with the pool at all. The next evaluation began less than 10 minutes later. The recruits assembled on a wide training field behind the aquatic complex where rows of equipment stations stretched across nearly 100 yards of open ground. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, but nobody paid attention. Fatigue weighed on every movement. Noah Bennett took his place in line while instructors moved between stations preparing the next event. Sergeant Mason Reed stood near a timing table speaking with 2 assistant instructors. He appeared confident, relaxed, completely unaffected by the tension that lingered from the earlier dismissal. Around the field, recruits quietly exchanged theories about what would come next. Some worried about endurance drills. Others expected another teamwork exercise. Noah heard none of it. His attention kept drifting back to the rescue diagram. The inconsistency refused to leave his mind. Every detail remained clear. The posted procedure, Reed's instructions, the dismissed recruit. One of those things did not belong with the others. A whistle sounded. "Listen up," Reed called. "Today is about decision-making under pressure. You will rotate through multiple stations. Every action will be evaluated." The recruits straightened immediately. Reed paced slowly in front of them. Most failures happen because people stop thinking. They assume someone else has already checked the details. Noah felt those words hit differently than they seemed intended. Nearby, several recruits nodded as if hearing a motivational speech. Noah heard something else. He heard a warning. The stations began. Candidates moved through navigation challenges, equipment inspections, and communication exercises. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Sweat replaced the cold moisture from the morning. Through it all, Noah noticed something unusual. Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker rarely spoke. She observed each station carefully, making occasional notes on a small clipboard. Unlike the other instructors, she never interrupted. She never corrected mistakes immediately. Instead, she watched recruits react when problems appeared. By early afternoon, Noah's team arrived at an equipment verification station. On a table sat several pieces of rescue gear arranged beside laminated procedure cards. The moment Noah saw them, his pulse quickened. One of the cards displayed the exact sequence from the whiteboard, the same sequence that differed from Reed's instructions earlier that morning. Noah stared at it for several seconds. There was no doubt now. He had remembered correctly. The discrepancy was real. "Move it along, Bennett," an assistant instructor said. Noah nodded and completed the station, but his thoughts accelerated. If he noticed this, others could notice it too. Yet nobody seemed willing to say anything. Maybe they were too tired. Maybe they assumed the instructors knew best. Maybe they were afraid. As the final station ended, The recruits gathered near the central field for debriefing. Reed stepped forward once again. "Some of you performed well today," he announced. "Others still need to learn accountability." Noah looked toward Grace Whitaker. She stood several feet away, silent as always. Then something unexpected happened. Grace slowly turned her head toward Noah for only a moment before looking away again. It lasted less than a second. Yet Noah felt as though she had just handed him a choice. Stay quiet and move forward. Or ask the question that nobody else seemed willing to ask. The debrief ended, but Noah Bennett carried the question with him for the rest of the afternoon. The training schedule continued without pause. Recruits moved from one task to another, hauling equipment, completing inspections, and reviewing procedures under constant supervision. Yet every time Noah glanced at a rescue manual, a training card, or a posted instruction sheet, he found himself comparing it to what had happened beside the pool that morning. The differences were impossible to ignore now. By early evening, the sun hung low over the compound, casting long shadows across the concrete walkways. The recruits were given 20 minutes to eat before the next phase of training. Inside the mess hall, conversations remained quiet. Exhaustion had drained most people of the energy required for small talk. Noah sat at the end of a table, pushing food around his tray while studying a folded copy of the day's training schedule. Across from him sat Tyler Brooks, another recruit who had survived the first weeks of the program. Tyler noticed Noah's distraction immediately. "You have been somewhere else all day," he said. Noah hesitated. "Do you remember the rescue drill this morning?" Tyler gave a short laugh. "Hard to forget after watching somebody get dropped from the program." Noah lowered his voice. What if he was not the one who made the mistake? Tyler stopped eating. "Careful. I am serious." Tyler glanced around the room before leaning forward. Everybody saw what happened. Reed gave an order. The recruit failed. Noah shook his head slowly. "That is not exactly what happened." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Tyler sat back in his chair. "Even if you are right, what are you going to do about it?" Noah did not answer because he did not know. The easiest option was to stay quiet. The safest option was to stay quiet. But the question kept growing heavier every hour. After dinner, the recruits returned to the training compound for an evening review session. Floodlights illuminated the classroom building as candidates filed inside. Noah entered with the rest of the group and immediately noticed something unusual. The whiteboard had been erased. Every diagram was gone. Every procedure chart had disappeared. Only a single sentence remained written across the center in black marker. "Attention to detail reveals character." Several recruits read the sentence and moved on. Noah stopped. His eyes narrowed. It felt deliberate, almost like a message. The room settled. A few moments later, Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker entered alone. No assistant instructors. No Sergeant Reed. The room instantly grew quiet. Grace stood at the front without speaking. She studied the room for nearly 10 seconds. Long enough for everyone to become uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. "Today, many of you completed difficult tasks." Her voice was calm and steady. "Some of you focused on performance. Some focused on endurance. Some focused on surviving until tomorrow." She paused. Very few focused on observation. Noah felt his stomach tighten. Grace's eyes moved slowly across the room. When they reached him, they lingered for only a moment before continuing. "The military rewards discipline," she said. "But discipline without awareness can become a liability." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Grace closed her notebook. Class dismissed. Confused looks spread throughout the room. That was all. No lecture. No explanation. As recruits stood and headed for the door, Noah remained frozen in his chair. For the second time that day, it felt as though Grace Whitaker had spoken directly to him without ever using his name. That night, sleep was supposed to be the reward. Instead, it became another challenge. The barracks were unusually quiet as recruits settled into their bunks after nearly 18 hours of continuous training. Some fell asleep within minutes. Others stared at the ceiling, replaying mistakes from the day. Noah Bennett belonged to the second group. He lay awake listening to the distant hum of generators outside and the occasional footsteps of instructors making rounds through the compound. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rescue diagram. He heard Grace Whitaker's words. Discipline without awareness can become a liability. Around midnight, Noah finally sat up. Across the room, most recruits were asleep. A faint security light spilled through the windows, casting long shadows between the rows of bunks. Noah reached into his locker and pulled out the training handbook issued during the first week of the program. He opened it carefully and flipped through the pages. Equipment procedures, emergency protocols, rescue operations. The answer appeared less than 5 minutes later. There it was in black and white. The exact sequence shown on the classroom board. The exact sequence displayed at the equipment station. The same procedure that had been different from the instructions given during the pool exercise. Noah stared at the page. His pulse quickened. For the first time, he possessed proof. Not suspicion, not instinct. Proof. Yet instead of feeling relieved, he felt uneasy. What was he supposed to do with it? Challenging an instructor was not a small matter. Sergeant Mason Reed had trained candidates for years. His reputation carried weight throughout the command. Noah was simply a recruit trying to survive another week. The logical choice remained obvious. Stay silent. Focus on training. Graduate if possible. Move on. But another thought refused to disappear. What about the recruit who had been dismissed? What if his entire future had been altered because nobody spoke up? Noah closed the handbook and sat quietly for several minutes. Then he noticed something tucked inside the back cover. A folded sheet of paper partially hidden between the pages. Curious, he pulled it free. It was an older evaluation guide, probably left there by accident. Most of it contained standard instructions. One sentence near the bottom caught his attention immediately. Integrity requires action when facts contradict assumptions. Noah read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The words felt strangely familiar. Like something Grace Whitaker would say. The next morning arrived quickly. Recruits assembled before sunrise for another day of evaluations. The air felt cooler than the previous morning, and a steady breeze moved across the training grounds. Noah joined the formation carrying the same secret he had carried all night. Across the field, instructors gathered near a briefing area. Reed stood among them, speaking confidently. Grace Whitaker stood nearby, silent as always. As the formation settled into place, Noah noticed something unexpected. A new training board had been positioned beside the field. Posted at eye level for every recruit to see was the rescue procedure sequence. The correct one. The same one printed in the handbook. Noah looked from the board to Reed, then toward Grace. For a brief moment, Grace met his eyes. Her expression never changed. But Noah suddenly understood something important. She already knew. The realization followed Noah Bennett throughout the morning. Chief Instructor Grace Whitaker knew about the discrepancy. The posted procedure made that impossible to deny. Yet she had done nothing to correct it publicly. At least not yet. The question was no longer whether a mistake had occurred. The question was why she was allowing it to remain unchallenged. Training resumed immediately after formation. Recruits rotated through leadership exercises designed to test judgment under pressure. Teams were assigned simple tasks, but every scenario contained incomplete information. Some candidates rushed forward and failed. Others hesitated and lost valuable time. Noah began noticing a pattern. The instructors rarely evaluated the outcome alone. They watched how decisions were made. They watched who asked questions and who blindly followed assumptions. By midday, the recruits were gathered around a large navigation table positioned beneath an outdoor canopy. Maps, compasses, and instruction cards covered the surface. Sergeant Mason Reed walked among the groups reviewing their progress. His confidence appeared unchanged. His authority remained unquestioned. Most recruits treated his words as absolute. Noah had done the same until 2 days earlier. Now he found himself examining everything more carefully. At one point, Reed stopped beside Noah's team and pointed toward a route marked on the map. "That is your fastest option," he said before moving on. Several recruits immediately began adjusting their plan. Noah studied the map for several seconds. The route Reed suggested crossed terrain specifically marked as restricted. A teammate noticed his hesitation. "What is wrong?" Noah tapped the symbol quietly. "Look closer." The group examined the map again. Within moments, they realized the issue. Reed's route was not the correct answer. Whether intentional or accidental, the guidance conflicted with the information directly in front of them. For the rest of the exercise, Noah could not ignore the growing connection. The rescue drill, the handbook, the navigation test, the message on the classroom board. Attention to detail reveals character. It was all pointing toward the same lesson. Late that afternoon, recruits assembled for evaluation reviews. One by one, Instructors discussed common mistakes. Reed spoke first. Many candidates still rely too heavily on authority instead of independent analysis. Noah nearly laughed at the irony. Around him, several recruits nodded without fully understanding. Then Grace Whitaker stepped forward. The field became silent. She rarely addressed the entire class. When she did, people listened. Grace scanned the formation carefully. Every organization depends on trust, she said. But trust is not the same as blindness. The words landed heavily across the group. A strong team verifies facts. A weak team assumes someone else already has. Her eyes moved across the formation before settling briefly on Noah. Sometimes the easiest mistake to make is believing that a title automatically guarantees accuracy. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Grace allowed the silence to linger before stepping back. The evaluation ended moments later. As recruits began dispersing toward the barracks, Noah remained standing. His heartbeat had quickened. For nearly 48 hours, he had wrestled with uncertainty. Now the uncertainty was disappearing. Grace Whitaker was not hiding the truth. She was waiting to see whether anyone possessed the courage to recognize it and speak. The opportunity arrived sooner than Noah Bennett expected. The following morning began with a full class review session held inside the largest briefing hall on the compound. Nearly every instructor attended. Maps covered the walls. Training reports sat stacked on tables near the front of the room. Recruits filled the rows of seats, exhausted but alert. Rumors had spread overnight that several evaluations were about to be discussed publicly. Noah entered quietly and took a seat near the middle. A few moments later, Sergeant Mason Reed stepped to the front. As always, his posture radiated confidence. He began reviewing performance metrics from the previous week, highlighting common failures and praising a handful of top performers. The room remained silent. Then Reed reached a familiar topic. One of the most disappointing incidents this cycle occurred during the rescue assessment, he said. A candidate failed to execute a basic procedure and paid the price for that failure. Noah felt every muscle tighten. Around the room, recruits shifted uncomfortably. Nobody mentioned the dismissed recruit by name, but everyone knew who Reed meant. Reed continued. The lesson is simple. Follow instructions exactly as given. Several instructors nodded. Others remained expressionless. Noah glanced toward Grace Whitaker. She sat near the side wall with a notebook resting on her lap. She said nothing. She simply listened. Reed moved to the next slide. The rescue procedure appeared on a large screen. Noah immediately noticed it was the official version from the handbook, not the version Reed had used during the exercise. His heartbeat accelerated. The contradiction now sat directly in front of the entire room. Yet nobody seemed willing to acknowledge it. Reed pointed toward the screen. Questions. Silence followed. Noah lowered his eyes for a moment. Every instinct told him to stay quiet. Recruits were not supposed to challenge instructors, especially not instructors with Reed's reputation. Across the room, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Noah remembered the handbook, the training card, the navigation exercise, the statement on the classroom board. Integrity requires action when facts contradict assumptions. Slowly he stood. Chairs creaked as several recruits turned toward him. Reed looked surprised. Yes, Bennett. The room became completely still. Noah took a breath. Sir, I have a question about the rescue assessment. Reed crossed his arms. Go ahead. Noah looked briefly at the screen before speaking. The procedure displayed there is different from the procedure we were instructed to follow during the exercise. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Nobody looked away now. Reed's expression hardened slightly. What exactly are you suggesting? Noah swallowed. This was the moment. The point of no return. I am suggesting that the dismissed recruit followed the posted procedure correctly. Silence crashed over the briefing hall. Several recruits stared in disbelief. A few instructors exchanged quick glances. Reed opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the room. Calm, controlled, unmistakable. Continue, Bennett. Every head turned toward Grace Whitaker. For the first time in days, she had finally spoken. Noah Bennett felt dozens of eyes fixed on him. The briefing hall had become so quiet that even the hum of the overhead lights seemed loud. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Grace Whitaker remained seated, her attention focused entirely on Noah. Continue, Bennett, she repeated. Noah nodded slowly. His voice remained steady despite the tension. The procedure displayed on the screen matches the handbook, the training cards, and the evaluation materials used throughout the week. He glanced toward the projected slide. The instructions given during the rescue assessment were different. Several recruits exchanged surprised looks. Others stared straight ahead, afraid to react. Noah continued. The dismissed recruit followed the documented procedure. The discrepancy came from the instructions delivered during the exercise. Sergeant Mason Reed stepped forward. You are making a serious accusation. Noah met his gaze. I am stating what I observed, sir. Reed folded his arms. And how long have you been investigating instructors instead of focusing on your own training? A few nervous laughs almost escaped from the back rows before immediately dying away. Noah did not respond. He simply looked toward the screen. Then something unexpected happened. Grace Whitaker stood. The room instantly fell silent again. She walked toward the front of the hall with the same calm confidence she carried everywhere. There was no anger in her expression, no frustration, only focus. When she reached the screen, she picked up a remote and pressed a button. A second slide appeared. Gasps spread across the room. The new image displayed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the official rescue procedure from the training manual. On the right was the version used during the assessment. The differences were highlighted in bright red. Nobody could miss them now. Reed's expression changed for the first time. It was subtle, but it was there. Grace looked out across the room. How many of you noticed this? She asked. Not a single hand went up. How many of you suspected something was wrong? Slowly, 3 hands rose. Then 5. Then several more. Noah kept his hand raised. Grace nodded. And how many of you said nothing? Every hand lowered. The answer was obvious. Grace allowed the silence to settle over the room. Then she turned toward the recruits. For 3 days, this class has been participating in an evaluation. Confused looks spread across the hall. Several recruits glanced at one another. Grace continued. The rescue assessment was never about water. It was never about endurance. It was never about memorization. She paused. It was about judgment. Nobody spoke. Grace pointed toward the 2 procedures displayed behind her. A leader must recognize inconsistencies. A professional must verify facts. Most importantly, a teammate must be willing to speak when something appears wrong. The realization hit the room all at once. Noah saw it in their faces. The rescue exercise had been only the beginning. The real test had been happening ever since. Grace turned toward Noah. Private Bennett noticed the discrepancy. Then she looked across the rest of the room. But noticing it was only half the challenge, she paused once more. The harder part was deciding whether to speak. The room remained silent long after Grace Whitaker finished speaking. No one rushed to respond. No one looked away from the 2 procedures displayed on the screen. For days, the recruits had believed they were being evaluated on physical performance, endurance, and technical skill. Now they understood they had been participating in something far more important. Grace slowly walked to the center of the briefing hall. In every military organization, she said, mistakes will happen. Equipment will fail. Information will be incomplete. Leaders will occasionally be wrong. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. What determines success is whether someone has the courage to recognize a problem and address it before it grows larger. She turned toward Noah Bennett. Private Bennett noticed the discrepancy. He verified it. He questioned his own assumptions. Then he accepted the risk of speaking publicly. Noah stood motionless. The attention made him uncomfortable. He had not been seeking recognition. He had simply reached a point where remaining silent felt worse than speaking. Grace nodded once. That is the standard. Across the room, recruits exchanged thoughtful glances. Many realized they had noticed small details during the week, but dismissed them. Others had trusted authority without checking facts for themselves. The lesson was impossible to ignore now. Then Grace revealed the final piece. The recruit dismissed during the rescue assessment was never removed from the program. A wave of surprise moved through the hall. He was reassigned temporarily as part of the evaluation design. Grace continued. His performance record remains intact. Relief appeared on several faces. Noah felt tension leave his shoulders for the first time in days. Grace pressed a button on the remote. The comparison slides disappeared. In their place appeared a single sentence. Character is revealed when speaking up becomes difficult. That, Grace said, was the real test. For a moment, nobody moved. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior instructors began to clap. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Not loud or celebratory. Respectful. Genuine. Noah looked down, unsure how to react. When the applause faded, Grace gathered her notebook and headed toward the exit. Before leaving, she paused beside Noah. "You know why I stayed silent?" she asked quietly. Noah shook his head. Grace offered the faintest hint of a smile. "Because leadership is not proving that you know the answer." She glanced around the room. "It is discovering who else is willing to find it." Then she walked away. Months later, many recruits would forget specific drills, times, scores, and rankings from that training cycle. They would forget the weather, the schedules, and the long hours. But they would remember the week when a simple discrepancy exposed a much larger lesson. They would remember the instructor who never raised her voice. They would remember the recruit who chose to speak when silence would have been easier. And they would remember that real professionalism is not blind obedience. It is the discipline to observe carefully, think critically, and act with integrity when the moment demands it. In the end, the biggest mistake was never the incorrect procedure. The biggest mistake was believing that someone else would take responsibility for noticing it.